Today we are doing different sort of office hour because I'm doing it on YouTube. And so I'm inviting you to ask the English teacher. That's me. I'm Wade Bradford. I do want to talk about some very common mistakes that I see in research papers. In particular, I want to talk about in-text citations that follow MLA guidelines. The biggest mistake that I've seen this semester from my students is something that wouldn't be a mistake if it was a different type of research paper. So we want to follow the MLA standard. MLA stands for Modern Language Association, and I like to imagine that MLA is this coven of cloaked druid-like English teachers that get together around a cauldron and they decide where the period goes and how to use a semicolon, things like that. So if we're doing an in-text citation, if you see down there, if I can point to it correctly, this would be at the end of a quote. We would have the last name of the author, followed by a period on the outside of the citation. So that's how it would look correctly if we're following. Oh, there she is again. And that's how it would look correctly if we're following MLA. So the big mistake that I see is that students, when they're in my class, they've learned APA format. So a lot of psychology papers and other papers will format it with APA format. And so in APA format, the student would cite the name of the author and a comma and the year in which the material comes from. But we don't want to do that for an MLA paper. I will mark you down for that, and so will other teachers. So you definitely want to follow this. So here's the thing. Most of the sources are going to come from websites. So all we need is a last name. We just need a last name. And if it's a print source, then you want to make sure that you include the page number. Most of the time in modern research papers, my students aren't getting print resources, but it's great. So if you want to, if you're quoting from an actual book, then you want to have the page number. So it's the last name, space, the page number. And again, the period goes outside the citation. So here's the thing. We want to cite the author's last name. We don't want to have the first and the last name. We want to cite the author's last name. Now, we can do that in a couple different ways. If we are writing introductory material, like if I say, oh, according to John Smith, a reporter at the New York Times, he explains, and then I present the quote by John Smith. Since I've said in my own words, I've said John Smith's name, I actually don't need to have this little citation at the end because I said his name. So I owe the reader material. I owe you, the reader, context and credit where credit is due. So if I mention John Smith's name in my own words, I did it. I don't need to do it again. There she is again. There's my wife. So remember that. So we want to cite the author's name somewhere within our sentence. Very often in a research paper, it's in the parenthesis. Now, a lot of times if we're getting material from a website, there's a decent chance that it will be published anonymously, or it will say like staff reporter or something like that. If we're quoting material from WebMD, that's a collaboration. So they very often there's websites that they don't list the last name. So if you're quoting something and there's no author cited, then you owe me the next best thing. If there's no author, you cite the title of the article. So if there's no author, you give me the title of the article. And that title would be in quotation marks as well as inside the parenthesis. Here's an example. So I had my students do a scavenger hunt, and so they were looking up different islands that are for sale. So yeah. So if we've got a research project where there's no author name, then we want the author. Then we want the article title. That's the next best thing. Now, if we get to a website and there's no article title and there's no name of the author, then the next best thing is for us to cite the name of the website or the magazine or the book. So that's the next best thing that we want to do. So basically, the three things that you want to be looking for. You want to give me the author's name. If there's no author's name, then you give me the title of the article. If there's no article title, then you give me the name of the book or the magazine or the website, whatever the big thing is, then you give me that name. I do see a lot of punctuation errors when it comes to these research papers. And let me show you the most common ones that I see. Again, this is about in-text citations. So the most common mistake that I see with in-text citations in what should be an MLA formatted research paper is we have this problem. So I love pretzels, period, Bush, period. So this is incorrect. This is incorrect because there's two periods. And so we just want to have one period. So the number one mistake that I see in research papers is what I just showed you. Students, they put a period at the end of their quote because normally they're right. If we didn't have the little parenthesis, we wouldn't need to have the period on the outside of the quotation. But because we're dealing with those parenthetic citations, we just want to have one period at the very end of the sentence, so that is where it goes. Another incorrect version that I often see is not using a period, but using a comma. And that's, you know, a natural tendency to do, to have a comma to segue back into the rest of the sentence. But again, if we are having the parenthetic citation, that's not what we do. There's two incorrect things in this. There's the comma that's there, and there's also a mistake that I see very often, which is the period is placed on the inside of the citation, of the parenthesis. And again, that's not what we want to do. Oh, that's nice. Thank you, Cami. And she says, yep, I've made that mistake mostly when I quote a question. Oh, well, here's the weird thing about, if we want to get obscure, there's several confusing things about MLA. So if we were going to quote a question in a research paper, we do actually get to have the punctuation, right? So that question mark gets to be there on the inside of the quote. So if we're quoting from, again, George W. Bush, do I love pretzels? Because that's a question and the question is an important component, then, and it doesn't count as the period, in this case, it's not ending the sentence, we would leave the question mark there. So that's a nice obscure, and most of these, I guess, this is probably my most obscure, tedious video that I've ever made. Speaking of tedious, what if we have a quote within a quote? Well, let's say this. Let's say that I'm writing a research paper. And I've read an article. The article's by John Smith. And in John Smith's article, he interviews the former president, George W. Bush. And during that interview, George W. Bush claims, "I love pretzels." So we've taken a quote out of a quote, right? So we've taken a quote out of a quote. And so even though it's George W. Bush who's saying these words, we still want to, in the citation, give credit to where credit is due. So we want to have we want to let the reader know that, hey, this is quoted in John Smith's article. So to do that in the in-text citation, as you can see down there, ding, 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 you write QTD period. So that's short for quoted, in, and then the last name of the author. And again, if it's from a print source, if we're quoting from a book, then we want to have the page number. All right, so what I'm going to do here is talk about these student entries. So as I mentioned, we did this research scavenger hunt, and I told students to go forth into the realm of the internet and look at the different, make sure I'm okay on time, look at the different things you can find to answer the following three prompts. I wanted them to find the world's least expensive island. I want the cheapest island that is currently for sale. So find me the cheapest island. I wanted them to find me an example of an inventor, hopefully a successful inventor, who invented the product or created the invention before they turned 19. And I also wanted them to find a lotto winner, a winner of the lottery or the lotto, who lost all the money or had some kind of misfortune, about that. So, so they did that, and they basically, I'm not showing you the entire entries, and I'm keeping all of these anonymous, but I wanted to show you some of the things so that if you're writing a research paper, you can make sure that you don't make these mistakes. So here's what we have. Let me read this. According to a list made by Thrillist, one can buy a small island in Maine for under $40,000, period. Then we have the quote. At just over 43,560 square feet, this dinky little island really isn't that dinky for the price you pay. And then we have the person's last name. So a couple things about this. So what I'm going to be doing when I'm grading the research paper is that in addition to looking for your ideas, I'm going to be looking for your citation mistakes. And so I'm looking at things about who you're giving credit to and the way you're giving credit to them. So the first thing is, if we have the name of a magazine or a website, we do want to italicize things, right? So we italicize big things like the title of books, the titles of movies, the titles of magazines, the titles of newspapers like the New York Times. Those go in italics. Websites as well. And if we are quoting from something that's small, something like an article title, something like a chapter title, the name of a short story, the name of a song, the name of a poem, something that can be put inside something else, right? So the smaller things, those have quotation marks around them. Okay, so I fixed that. So Thrillist is now italicized. The next thing that I want to say, that this is a very common mistake, and I don't want to see it. It's not so much a mistake, it's not the preference of English teachers, myself included. And this is called a dropped quote. A dropped quote is when, instead of having this smooth transition into the material, the quote is just dropped in there. And so you want to have some kind of transition. So if we say, according to a list made by Thrillist, one can buy a small island in Maine for just under $40,000. We want to, at least, the very least we can do is have a colon to lead into that. We could also say, the reviewer explains, and this is what I call lead-in material, or what's also known as signal phrases. So if we have something like the reviewer explains, and then we have a comma before we launch into the material, that's good to do. The other thing that we want to fix here, and this is something I talked about, so we have, if you can see on my screen, we have an extra period, so we only want one period, and this is another common mistake, and it's a pet peeve of mine. You want to have a space between the quotation mark and the parenthesis. So now this is better. So remember, the big things, books, movies, magazines, websites, those are italicized. And the little things, or if not little, the things that can be put into other things. So articles, short stories, chapter titles, the names of songs, the names of poems, those are smaller things that can be put into larger things, so put those in quotation marks. Here's another example of what I see a lot. I already talked about this, but let me mention it again. If we have the last name of the author, if we're following MLA, we don't put the year. We don't put the year, so we don't want that. And so I'm just going to get that out of here. And I got another copy of this. This is also something that we don't want to have. If we say, according to Amrita Khalid, and we provide the quote, an anonymous buyer offered her $1.5 million and the car of her choice, but she declined. So if we mention the author's name in the text, in our sentence, as the student does here, then we don't need anything here. So we would have the period on the inside of the quotation, and we'd be done. We'd be done. Unless there's a page number that we need to cite, if we have a print source, we don't need to do anything else. We've given the reader the name of the source. Well, I spent a lot of time talking about in-text citations, probably too much time. But the reason why I spent so much time is because it is very important, um, especially for a research paper. The thing about writing a research paper that's different from writing an argument essay is that the argument essay, although it's probably going to have research in it as well, at least it does in my class, but an argument essay it's founded on your ideas, that these are your ideas, and you have found quotes from other people that are going to help support your ideas. Whereas a research paper, I think of it as you have gone out and you've explored and you've learned something, and now you are going to teach us something about the material. And so it's really you are curating sources from many different authors and locations and things like that. So be mindful of that. All right, that's it. Thanks for joining me. Bye.